The morning sun painted the shooting range in harsh golden light as Sarah Martinez stepped out of the military transport vehicle. Dust swirled around her boots as she surveyed the training facility at Fort Henderson. She had been transferred here just 3 days ago, and already she could feel the weight of curious stares from the other soldiers. Being one of the few female snipers in the unit meant she constantly had to prove herself, but Sarah was used to that by now. Corporal Jake Thompson watched from across the range as the new recruit approached the equipment station. He had heard rumors about her transfer, whispers in the mess hall about some incident at her previous base. Thompson was known around the base for his practical jokes and his tendency to test new arrivals, especially those he thought might not belong in his unit. At 28, he had been in the Army for 8 years and considered himself a veteran who knew how to separate the real soldiers from the pretenders. Sarah approached the weapons rack where Thompson was organizing the sniper rifles for the day's training session. She moved with quiet confidence, her gear properly secured and her posture straight. Despite her small frame, there was something in her eyes that spoke of experience beyond her apparent age. She looked to be in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in regulation style and sharp brown eyes that seemed to take in every detail of her surroundings. "You must be Martinez," Thompson said without looking up from the rifle he was cleaning. "I'm Corporal Thompson. I run the sniper training program here." He paused and glanced at her with a smirk. "Hope you're ready for some real training. This isn't like whatever easy setup you had at your last base." Sarah nodded politely. "Yes, sir. I'm ready to get started." Her voice was calm and steady, showing no reaction to his condescending tone. She had learned long ago that the best response to doubt was simply to let her performance speak for itself. Thompson set down his cleaning cloth and picked up a large rifle from the rack. It was an M82 Barrett, a powerful sniper rifle known for its long-range capabilities and devastating accuracy in the right hands. However, this particular weapon had a problem that Thompson was well aware of. The bolt mechanism had been jamming frequently, making it nearly impossible to fire more than one shot before requiring manual intervention to clear the jam. "Here's your weapon for today's exercise," Thompson said, handing her the M82 with a barely concealed grin. "Let's see what you can do with some real firepower." He had used this same trick on 3 previous new arrivals, watching them struggle and fail with the jammed weapon, while he and the other experienced soldiers shared knowing looks. Sarah accepted the rifle and immediately began inspecting it with practiced hands. She ran her fingers along the bolt mechanism, checked the scope alignment, and tested the trigger pull. Her movements were smooth and methodical, showing a familiarity with the weapon that was impossible to fake. Thompson watched her inspection with growing curiosity, but he remained confident that his little test would prove effective. "The targets are set at 800 meters, Thompson announced to the small group of soldiers who had gathered to watch the new recruit's first day. "Standard protocol is 3 shots. Best grouping wins. Martinez, you're up first." He stepped back with his arms crossed, expecting to enjoy the show of her struggling with the jammed rifle. Sarah positioned herself at the firing line and began setting up her shot. She adjusted the bipod legs, settled into a comfortable prone position, and began the process of ranging her target. Through the scope, she could see the distant target clearly, a standard military silhouette against the desert backdrop. The wind was minimal, maybe 3 miles per hour from the west, which would have little effect on the trajectory at this range. As she prepared to take her first shot, something caught Thompson's eye. Hanging from a chain around Sarah's neck was a small military medal, partially hidden beneath her combat jacket. When she shifted position, the medal turned slightly, and Thompson could see something engraved on the back. His casual interest suddenly became focused attention as he tried to make out what was written there. Sarah controlled her breathing and gently squeezed the trigger. The M82 fired with its characteristic thunderous boom, but instead of the smooth bolt cycling she expected, she felt the telltale resistance of a jam. Without hesitation or frustration, she quickly performed the immediate action drill to clear the malfunction, ejecting the stuck casing and chambering a new round. The entire process took her less than 5 seconds. Thompson's eyes widened as he watched her expertly handle the malfunction. Most soldiers, even experienced ones, would have taken at least 15 to 20 seconds to clear that type of jam, and many would have required assistance. Her movements were automatic, born from countless hours of training and real-world experience. She fired her second shot, and again the rifle jammed. Again, she cleared it with fluid efficiency. Thompson found himself leaning forward, trying to get a better look at the metal around her neck. There was definitely something engraved there, but he couldn't quite make it out from his position. As Sarah prepared for her third shot, a slight breeze caught her jacket, and the metal swung free for just a moment. Thompson's breath caught in his throat as he caught a glimpse of numbers engraved on the back of the metal. It looked like 305, but he couldn't be certain. His mind raced as he tried to process what that might mean. The third shot rang out across the range, followed once again by the sound of Sarah efficiently clearing another jam. She set the rifle down and looked back at Thompson with a neutral expression. "Rifle's got a bolt issue, Corporal. Might want to have the armorer take a look at it." Thompson nodded absently, his attention still fixed on the metal that had now disappeared back beneath her jacket. He picked up his binoculars to check her target, fully expecting to see wild shots scattered across the target area due to the jammed rifle. Instead, he found himself staring at 3 perfectly placed shots, all within a 2-inch group at the center of the target's chest. The other soldiers who had been watching began murmuring among themselves. Even with a properly functioning rifle, maintaining that level of accuracy at 800 meters required exceptional skill. To do it while dealing with constant malfunctions was something else entirely. Thompson found himself re-evaluating everything he thought he knew about the quiet woman standing beside him. "Not bad for a warm-up," Sarah said simply, beginning to clean the rifle with the same methodical precision she had shown in her shooting. "What's the next exercise?" Thompson stood there for a moment, still processing what he had witnessed. The metal, the impossible accuracy with a jammed rifle, the way she handled the malfunctions like they were routine. A cold realization was beginning to form in his mind about who exactly had been assigned to his unit. Around them, the other soldiers continued to whisper and point at the distant target. Word was already spreading that the new female recruit had just accomplished something that most of them couldn't do with perfect equipment. Thompson knew that by evening the entire base would be talking about Sarah Martinez and her remarkable first day on the range. But Thompson's attention remained fixed on that metal hidden beneath her jacket, and the numbers he thought he had seen engraved there. If his suspicions were correct, he had just made a terrible mistake in his assessment of the new arrival. The question now was whether he had the courage to find out the truth about who Sarah Martinez really was, and what those numbers on her medal actually meant. The mess hall buzzed with conversation that evening as news of the afternoon's shooting demonstration spread throughout the base. Thompson sat alone at his usual table, picking at his dinner, while his mind churned over what he had witnessed. He had spent the remainder of the day running standard training exercises, but his attention kept drifting back to Sarah and that mysterious medal. Sarah entered the mess hall and selected her meal with the same quiet efficiency she had shown on the range. She chose a table near the back, away from the clusters of soldiers who kept glancing in her direction and whispering. Thompson watched as several younger soldiers approached her table, clearly hoping to hear stories about her shooting. But she politely deflected their questions and focused on her meal. Unable to contain his curiosity any longer, Thompson approached her table. "Mind if I sit down?" he asked, his earlier cockiness replaced by genuine uncertainty. Sarah looked up and nodded toward the empty chair across from her. "Of course, Corporal." Thompson sat down and struggled to find the right words. His usual confidence had been shaken by the day's events, and he found himself genuinely curious about the woman sitting across from him. That was impressive shooting today, he began carefully, especially considering the equipment issues. The rifle just needed some attention, Sarah replied simply, taking a bite of her meal. Nothing that couldn't be managed. Thompson leaned forward slightly. Most soldiers would have been frustrated by those constant jams. You handled them like you've dealt with that exact problem 100 times before. Something flickered in Sarah's eyes, a brief moment where her careful composure seemed to waver. Equipment fails. It's part of the job to adapt and overcome. Where did you serve before this? Thompson asked, trying to sound casual despite his growing suspicions. Various places, Sarah answered vaguely, mostly overseas deployments. She continued eating, clearly not inclined to elaborate. Thompson decided to take a more direct approach. I couldn't help but notice the medal you wear. It's not standard issue. Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her chest, where the medal hung beneath her jacket. For the first time since he had met her, Thompson saw her carefully maintained composure crack slightly. It's personal, she said quietly. Before Thompson could respond, Sergeant Miller approached their table. Miller was the unit's senior non-commissioned officer and had been in the Army for over 15 years. He was known for his no-nonsense attitude and his ability to spot exceptional soldiers. Martinez, Miller said, I need to speak with you privately. My office, 10 minutes. His tone was serious, and Thompson noticed that Miller's expression was unreadable. Sarah nodded and finished her meal quickly. As she stood to leave, Thompson caught another glimpse of the medal as it swung free from her jacket. This time he was certain he saw the numbers 305 engraved on the back, but before he could get a better look, Sarah had adjusted her jacket and the medal was hidden again. After Sarah left, Thompson found himself alone with his thoughts and a growing sense that he had stumbled into something much bigger than a simple training exercise. He decided to visit the base's administrative office to see what he could learn about Sarah's service record, though he suspected that much of her file would be classified. Meanwhile, in Sergeant Miller's office, Sarah sat across from the desk while Miller reviewed a thick file that had been delivered that afternoon. The file was marked with various classification stamps and bore the seal of Special Operations Command. I received your complete service jacket today, Miller said, looking up from the documents. I have to admit, I wasn't expecting someone with your background to be assigned to a standard training unit. Sarah remained silent, her expression neutral. Miller continued. According to this file, you've spent the last 4 years assigned to classified operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Your specialty was long-range reconnaissance and elimination of high-value targets. He paused and looked directly at her. The file also indicates that you hold several commendations for exceptional marksmanship under combat conditions. I was reassigned here for a reason, Sergeant, Sarah said quietly. I'm here to train and support the unit in whatever capacity is needed. Miller leaned back in his chair. The reason for your reassignment isn't detailed in the file, but there are some notes about mandatory counseling and a recommendation for temporary duty away from combat operations. His expression softened slightly. Are you doing okay, Martinez? Sarah was quiet for a long moment before answering. Some missions are harder than others to come back from. The Army felt it would be beneficial for me to spend some time in a training environment before considering my next assignment. Miller nodded understandingly. He had seen other soldiers struggle with the transition from high-stress combat operations to regular military life. Well, you're welcome here as long as you need to be. Your skills will certainly be valuable in training the next generation of marksmen. Thank you, Sergeant. Is there anything specific you need me to focus on? Actually, yes, Miller said, closing the file. Corporal Thompson has been running the sniper training program, but frankly, his methods are outdated, and his attitude leaves something to be desired. I'd like you to work with him to improve the program. Share some of your real-world experience with the trainees. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her chair. I'm not sure that's appropriate, Sergeant. My experience was in a very specific type of operation that doesn't necessarily translate to standard military training. Miller studied her carefully. What type of operations, Martinez? Sarah hesitated before answering. Counter-sniper operations mostly, tracking and eliminating enemy marksmen who were targeting our forces and civilian populations. She paused. It's not the kind of experience that makes for good training stories. How many successful operations did you complete? Miller asked gently. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to the metal beneath her jacket. The exact number is classified. Sergeant. Miller noticed the gesture and began to understand the weight that Sarah was carrying. He had worked with enough special operations personnel to recognize the signs of someone who had seen too much combat and was struggling to readjust to normal military life. I understand, Miller said, but I still think your technical expertise would be valuable to the training program. You don't have to share operational details, but your knowledge of equipment, tactics, and marksmanship fundamentals could help save lives when these soldiers deploy. Sarah nodded slowly. I can work with Corporal Thompson on improving the technical aspects of the training. As Sarah left Miller's office, she walked past the administrative building where Thompson was attempting to access her service record. The clerk at the desk was explaining that most of her file was classified and unavailable to personnel without appropriate security clearance. What I can tell you, the clerk said, is that she was assigned to the 75th Ranger Regiment and later to a classified unit under Special Operations Command. Her awards and commendations are mostly classified, but I can see that she holds the Army Commendation Medal, the Bronze Star, and something called the Distinguished Marksman Medal. Thompson felt his pulse quicken. The Distinguished Marksman Medal was extremely rare and was only awarded to snipers who had demonstrated exceptional skill in combat operations. The fact that Sarah held this medal confirmed his growing suspicions about her background. Is there anything else you can tell me about her previous assignments? Thompson asked. The clerk shook his head. Everything else is classified above my clearance level. But I will say this, he added quietly. I've processed a lot of service records, and I've never seen a file with this many classified sections for someone of her rank. Thompson left the administrative building with more questions than answers, but he was now certain that Sarah Martinez was far more than just another transferred soldier. The numbers on her medal, her exceptional marksmanship skills, and her classified service record all pointed to someone who had operated at the highest levels of military special operations. As he walked back to his barracks, Thompson realized that his simple practical joke had potentially insulted one of the most skilled soldiers he would ever encounter. The thought of what those numbers on her medal might represent sent a chill down his spine, and he began to understand that tomorrow's training session would be unlike anything he had ever experienced. Thompson arrived at the range early the next morning, his mind still wrestling with everything he had learned about Sarah Martinez. He had barely slept, spending most of the night thinking about the implications of having someone with her apparent background assigned to his training unit. When Sarah arrived precisely on time, he noticed she moved with the same quiet confidence, but now he understood that her demeanor wasn't arrogance. It was the bearing of someone who had operated under extreme pressure. "Good morning, Corporal," Sarah said as she approached the equipment station. "Sergeant Miller mentioned you might want to discuss some modifications to the training program." Thompson nodded, still feeling awkward about his behavior the previous day. "Before we start, I owe you an apology. That rifle yesterday, I knew it was jammed. I was testing you, and it was unprofessional." Sarah studied him for a moment before responding. "I know it was a test. The bolt showed clear signs of repeated jamming, and the wear patterns were consistent with deliberate use despite known malfunctions." Her tone was matter-of-fact, without anger or resentment. "Why did you feel the need to test me?" Thompson felt his face flush with embarrassment. "Honestly, I've been running this program for 2 years, and I've gotten used to new arrivals who talk big but can't perform when it matters. I thought you might be another soldier who was transferred here because you couldn't cut it somewhere else. And now? Sarah asked. Now I realize I may have made assumptions about someone whose qualifications far exceed my own, Thompson admitted. Your shooting yesterday was unlike anything I've ever seen, especially under those conditions. Sarah was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh her words carefully. Everyone has their strengths, Corporal. I happen to have extensive experience with long-range marksmanship. That doesn't make me better than anyone else. Just different. Thompson decided to address the question that had been haunting him. That medal you wear, I couldn't help but notice it's not standard issue, and I thought I saw numbers engraved on it. Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her chest. And for the first time since he had known her, Thompson saw vulnerability in her expression. She was quiet for a long moment, before reaching beneath her jacket and pulling out the medal. It was indeed a distinguished marksman medal, but it had been customized with additional engraving. This medal was presented to me by my commanding officer after my last deployment, Sarah said quietly. The number engraved on the back represents confirmed eliminations of enemy combatants who were actively engaging our forces or threatening civilian populations. Thompson looked at the medal and felt his breath catch in his throat. Engraved clearly on the back were the numbers 305 confirmed. The reality of what that number represented hit him like a physical blow. This quiet woman had been responsible for eliminating 305 enemy combatants in direct combat operations. 305, Thompson said quietly, more to himself than to Sarah. Sarah nodded. Each one was a threat to American soldiers or innocent civilians. Each one was confirmed through multiple verification methods, including spotter confirmation, video evidence, or battlefield recovery. Her voice remained steady, but Thompson could see the weight of those memories in her eyes. Thompson struggled to process what he was hearing. Even the most elite snipers typically had confirmed kill counts in the dozens, not the hundreds. A number like 305 suggested years of continuous combat operations at the highest level of special operations. How long were you deployed? Thompson asked. 4 years. With only brief periods back in the States, Sarah replied. My unit was tasked with counter-sniper operations in some of the most dangerous areas of Afghanistan and Iraq. Enemy marksmen were causing significant casualties among our forces and terrorizing civilian populations. Our job was to locate and eliminate them before they could cause more harm. That's an incredible record, Thompson said, though he immediately realized how inadequate those words were. Sarah's expression darkened slightly. It's not a record I'm proud of, Corporal. Each of those numbers represents someone who died because of my actions. They may have been enemy combatants, they may have been threats to our people, but they were still human beings with families and lives. She paused. That's part of why I was reassigned here. The Army psychiatrist felt I needed time to process the psychological impact of that type of extended combat exposure. Thompson began to understand the full weight of what Sarah was carrying. The medal wasn't a trophy, it was a burden. The number 305 represented not just her exceptional skill, but also the psychological cost of years of life-and-death decisions. How do you deal with it? Thompson asked quietly. Some days are better than others, Sarah admitted. The counseling helps, and staying busy with meaningful work helps too. Training the next generation of soldiers feels like a way to use my experience for something positive. Thompson felt a new respect for Sarah that went far beyond her marksmanship skills. He was beginning to understand that her quiet demeanor wasn't just professionalism, it was the careful control of someone who had seen too much and was working to find her way back to normalcy. Sergeant Miller wants us to work together to improve the training program, Thompson said. I have to admit, after yesterday, I'm not sure what I could possibly teach you. Sarah smiled slightly, the first genuine smile Thompson had seen from her. You'd be surprised. Combat operations and training operations require different skill sets. You understand how to teach fundamentals and build progressive skill development. I know how to apply those skills under extreme stress. Together, we might be able to create something better than either of us could accomplish alone. Over the following weeks, Sarah and Thompson began collaborating on a revised training program. Sarah shared technical knowledge about advanced marksmanship techniques, equipment maintenance under field conditions, and stress management during high-pressure situations. Thompson contributed his understanding of instructional methods and his ability to break down complex skills into teachable components. The trainees quickly noticed the improvement in the program. Sarah's real-world experience brought a level of authenticity to the training that was impossible to fake. She taught them how to adapt to equipment failures, how to maintain accuracy under stress, and how to make split-second decisions about target identification and engagement. However, Sarah was careful never to share specific operational details or to glamorize the combat aspects of her experience. When trainees asked about her background, she would redirect the conversation to technical fundamentals or safety procedures. Thompson began to understand that Sarah's approach was designed to teach practical skills while protecting young soldiers from the psychological burden of her own experiences. One afternoon, after a particularly successful training session, Thompson and Sarah were cleaning equipment together when Thompson finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering him. "Do you regret your service?" Thompson asked. Sarah was quiet for a long time before answering. "I regret that the situations I was in required the actions I took. I regret that there are 305 families somewhere who lost someone because of decisions I made. But I don't regret serving my country or protecting my fellow soldiers." She looked at Thompson directly. "Those enemy snipers I eliminated had killed dozens of our people and were continuing to kill more every day. If I hadn't stopped them, how many more American soldiers would have come home in coffins?" Thompson nodded, beginning to understand the impossible moral complexity of Sarah's situation. She had been forced to make decisions that saved countless American lives, but the psychological cost of those decisions would stay with her forever. "The medal," Thompson said. "Is that why you wear it? To remember?" Sarah touched the medal through her jacket. "I wear it to remember that every action has consequences, and that the responsibility for those consequences doesn't end when the mission is over. Those 305 people aren't just numbers. They're reminders of the weight of the decisions I made and the lives that were affected by my actions." As the weeks passed, Thompson watched Sarah gradually become more integrated into the unit. Her exceptional skills earned the respect of every soldier on the base, but more importantly, her thoughtful approach to training and her genuine concern for the welfare of the trainees earned their trust. The quiet woman who had arrived with a jammed rifle had become one of the most valued instructors on the base. Thompson realized that his initial judgment of Sarah had been completely wrong. She wasn't a transferred problem soldier. She was a combat veteran struggling to find her place in a peacetime military. The medal she wore wasn't a badge of honor. It was a reminder of the personal cost of exceptional service to her country. The story of Sarah Martinez became a legend on the base, but not for the reasons Thompson might have expected. She was remembered not just for her incredible marksmanship skills, but for her dedication to training the next generation of soldiers and her quiet dignity in dealing with the weight of her combat experience. Years later, Thompson would often think about that first day on the range and the lesson it taught him about making assumptions. He learned that true strength often comes in quiet packages, and that the most decorated warriors are often those who carry their burdens with the greatest humility. Sarah Martinez had taught him that heroism isn't about the number of enemies you defeat. It's about how you carry the responsibility for your actions and how you use your experience to protect and serve others.